What happens when a beloved icon sits down for what should be a simple interview, only to face the most disrespectful treatment of her entire career? In just 35 seconds, one thoughtless comment would ignite a firestorm that would leave a talk show host scrambling to save face and an entire audience gasping in shock. This is the story of how Jimmy Kimmel destroyed his own show. The Tonight Show stage was set perfectly that Tuesday evening. The familiar blue backdrop gleamed under the studio lights, and the audience buzzed with excitement. They had come to see Cher, the woman who had conquered music, movies, and hearts for over 5 decades. She walked onto that stage wearing a stunning black sequin dress that caught every light in the room, her silver hair flowing like liquid mercury. The audience erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Jimmy Kimmel stood behind his desk, that trademark smirk already forming on his face. He waved to the crowd, soaking in their energy, but there was something different in his eyes that night. Something that suggested this interview would not go as planned. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Cher," Jimmy announced, his voice cutting through the thunderous applause. Cher glided across the stage, with the grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. She blew kisses to the audience, placed her hand over her heart in gratitude, and settled into the guest chair with the poise of true royalty. The crowd slowly quieted, hanging on every moment. "Cher, welcome back to the show," Jimmy said, but his tone already carried an edge that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Thank you for having me, Jimmy. It's always nice to be here," Cher replied, her voice warm and genuine. She crossed her legs elegantly and smiled that famous smile that had melted hearts since the 1960s. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, that smirk growing wider. "You know, Cher, I have to ask, at your age, do you ever think about slowing down? I mean, most people your age are thinking about retirement homes and early bird specials." The audience fell silent. You could hear a pin drop in that studio. Cher's smile faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly, like the professional she had always been. "Well, Jimmy, I think age is just a number. I feel great, I look great, and I'm still doing what I love," she responded, her voice steady but with a hint of steel creeping in. Jimmy chuckled, but it was not a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. "Come on, Cher, you've got to admit, seeing someone your age up there singing and dancing, it's a little, well, let's just say it's brave." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Cher's eyes flashed, and for the first time in the interview, she leaned forward in her chair. "Brave? What exactly do you mean by that, Jimmy?" "Oh, you know what I mean," Jimmy said, waving his hand dismissively. "It's just that there comes a time when maybe we should step aside and let the younger generation take over, don't you think?" The audience was now completely silent, sensing that something was going very wrong very quickly. Cher's jaw tightened, and her hands gripped the arms of her chair. This was not the respectful interview she had been promised. "I think," Cher said slowly, each word measured and deliberate, "that I've earned the right to decide when I'm done. I've been in this business longer than you've been alive, Jimmy." Jimmy's smirk never wavered. If anything, it grew more pronounced. "Well, that's exactly my point. Maybe it's time to hang up those sequins and call it a career. I mean, your last album didn't exactly set the world on fire, did it?" The gasps from the audience were audible now. Several people in the front row looked shocked, their mouths hanging open. This was not the Jimmy Kimmel they thought they knew. This was something else entirely, something cruel and calculated. Cher sat back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "My last album was very successful, actually. But even if it wasn't, that's not really the point, is it?" "Isn't it though?" Jimmy pressed, leaning forward now like a predator sensing weakness. "I mean, when do we stop pretending that these comeback attempts are anything more than desperate attempts to stay relevant?" The words hit the studio like a physical blow. Even the camera operators looked uncomfortable, shifting behind their equipment. The audience was now completely still, waiting to see how this would unfold. Cher's voice, when she spoke, was quietly dangerous. "Desperate? Is that what you think this is?" "Well," Jimmy said, spreading his hands as if he were being reasonable, "what would you call it? You're not exactly the hot young thing you used to be." That was the moment everything changed. Cher's eyes blazed with a fire that could have melted steel. She slowly uncrossed her legs and placed both feet firmly on the ground, her entire posture shifting from relaxed guest to coiled spring. "Let me tell you something, Jimmy," she said, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the studio. "I was selling out stadiums when you were still in diapers. I've won an Oscar, an Emmy, a Grammy, and more awards than you could count. I've survived in this business for over 50 years, not because I'm desperate, but because I'm damn good at what I do." Jimmy tried to interrupt, but Cher held up a hand that stopped him cold. "I'm not finished." The silence in the studio was deafening. Every person in that audience could feel the shift in energy, like the moment before lightning strikes. Cher's presence had transformed from gracious guest to commanding force of nature, and Jimmy Kimmel was about to learn what happens when you disrespect a legend. "You sit behind this desk every night," Cher continued, her voice gaining power with each word, "making jokes about people who have accomplished more in a single year than you'll accomplish in your entire career. You think because you have a microphone and a camera that gives you the right to tear people down?" Jimmy's smirk was finally starting to crack. He shifted in his chair, suddenly looking much smaller than he had moments before. "Cher, I was just trying to have some fun. It's comedy, you know. It's what I do." "Comedy?" Cher's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "There's nothing funny about what you just said. Comedy is supposed to lift people up, not tear them down. What you're doing is just cruel." The audience was transfixed. This was not the polite, scripted exchange they had expected. This was raw, real, and absolutely electric. You could feel the energy crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. Jimmy tried to regain control, straightening his tie and forcing his trademark grin back into place. "Come on, Cher. You've been in this business long enough to know how it works. If you can't take a little heat, maybe you should get out of the kitchen." Wrong thing to say. Absolutely the wrong thing to say. Cher stood up from her chair so fast it made the camera shake. She was magnificent in her fury, every inch the superstar she had always been. "Heat? You want to talk about heat? Let me tell you about heat, Jimmy." She began to pace her heels, clicking on the studio floor like a countdown to destruction. "Heat is performing for 3 hours straight in Vegas with a 104-degree fever because you don't want to disappoint your fans. Heat is getting back up after every critic, every doubter, every small-minded person like you tried to knock you down. Heat is reinventing yourself decade after decade while lesser talents fade into obscurity." Jimmy was now visibly sweating under the studio lights. His writers, sitting just off camera, looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. This was not going according to script, and everyone knew it. "Look, I think we're getting a little heated here," Jimmy said, trying to inject some levity into his voice. "Why don't we take it down a notch and talk about your new project?" "Oh no," Cher said, whirling around to face him directly. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to insult me and then pretend it never happened. You wanted to have this conversation, so let's have it." She walked back to her chair but didn't sit down. Instead, she placed her hands on the back of it, leaning forward like a tiger ready to pounce. "You want to know what's really desperate, Jimmy? What's desperate is a middle-aged man trying to get laughs by picking on women who could buy and sell him 10 times over." The audience gasped. Someone in the back actually applauded, but the sound was quickly swallowed by the tension in the room. Jimmy's face was turning red now, a combination of embarrassment and anger. "Now wait, just a minute," he started, his voice rising. "I've worked hard to get where I am. I didn't have everything handed to me on a silver platter." Cher's eyes flashed dangerously. "Handed to me? Handed to me?" Her voice boomed through the studio. "I started singing in coffee shops when I was 16 years old. I slept on park benches. I sang backup for people who wouldn't even look at me. I clawed my way to the top with my fingernails, and I did it without tearing anyone else down." She pointed at Jimmy with a finger that seemed to burn with righteous fire. "You sit in your comfortable chair, in your safe little studio, surrounded by writers who tell you what to say, and you have the nerve to call me desperate? The only desperate person on this stage is you." Jimmy's producers were now frantically gesturing from the wings, clearly wanting to cut to commercial, but Jimmy waved them off. His ego wouldn't let him back down now, even though he was clearly losing this battle. "I'm just saying," he said, his voice taking on a whining quality, "that maybe it's time for some of these older performers to step aside and make room for fresh talent. If looks could kill, Jimmy Kimmel would have been incinerated on the spot." Cher's eyes were blazing with a fury that could have powered the entire studio. "Older performers? Is that what you think I am?" She began to laugh, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. It was the laugh of someone who had heard every insult, faced every challenge, and come out victorious every single time. "Jimmy, let me explain something to you. I am not an older performer. I am the performer. I am the standard. I am the one that every young singer dreams of becoming." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even the camera operators had stopped moving, afraid to break the spell that Cher was weaving. "You want fresh talent?" she continued. "Fresh talent comes to my shows to learn how it's done. Fresh talent covers my songs. Fresh talent wishes they had 1/10 of the staying power I've had." Jimmy tried one more time to regain control. "All I'm saying is that the music industry is changing, and maybe. Stop. Cher's voice cut through his words like a sword. Just stop talking. Every word that comes out of your mouth makes you look smaller and more pathetic. She walked around the chair and sat back down, but her posture was different now. She wasn't the gracious guest anymore. She was a queen on her throne, looking down at a jester who had forgotten his place. Let me tell you what's really happening here, Jimmy, she said, her voice now calm but deadly. You're afraid. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Jimmy's face went pale, and for the first time since the interview began, his smirk completely disappeared. The audience leaned forward in their seats, sensing that Cher was about to deliver a knockout punch that would end this fight once and for all. Afraid? Jimmy stammered, his voice cracking slightly. What could I possibly be afraid of? Cher's smile was razor sharp, the smile of a predator who had cornered her prey. You're afraid that someone like me, someone with real talent and real staying power, makes you realize just how small and temporary you really are. She stood up again, but this time her movements were slow and deliberate, like a master chess player making the final move. You host a little talk show, Jimmy. That's it. That's your entire legacy. When you're gone, they'll replace you with another guy in a suit who can read from a teleprompter and pretend to be funny. Jimmy's hands were shaking now as he gripped his desk. That's not true. I've built something here. I have millions of viewers who tune in to see people like me. Cher shot back, her voice rising again. Without guests, without real stars, without people who have actually accomplished something in their lives, you're just a man sitting alone at a desk talking to himself. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning humming. Even the band members, usually invisible in the background, were staring in shock at what was unfolding before them. You want to know what I think, Jimmy? Cher continued, beginning to pace again like a caged lioness. I think you're terrified that deep down, everyone knows the truth. You're not talented. You're not special. You're just lucky. Jimmy's face was now bright red with anger and humiliation. You can't talk to me like that. This is my show. Your show? Cher laughed, and the sound echoed through the studio like thunder. This isn't your show, Jimmy. This is a network show. You're just an employee and not even a particularly good one. She stopped pacing and turned to face him directly, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. Let me tell you what your show really island. It's a platform for people like me to promote our work. Without us, without real celebrities, with real achievements, you have nothing. You are nothing. Jimmy tried to stand up, but his legs seemed weak beneath him. I've been doing this for years. I've interviewed presidents, movie stars, musicians. And what did you contribute to those interviews? Cher interrupted, her voice cutting through his protest like a blade. Did you make them funnier, smarter, more interesting? Or did you just sit there and try to make yourself look good at their expense? The audience was mesmerized. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This was a complete dismantling of everything Jimmy Kimmel thought he was, broadcast live to millions of people. You know what the difference is between you and me, Jimmy? Cher asked, her voice now eerily calm. When I leave this studio tonight, people will still be talking about my music, my movies, my performances. They'll remember me for decades to come. But you'll be forgotten the minute they turn off the cameras. Jimmy was now visibly shaking with rage. Get out, he said through gritted teeth. Just get out of here. Oh, I'm leaving, Cher said, walking back to collect her purse from beside her chair. But not because you told me to. I'm leaving because I have better things to do than waste my time with someone who mistakes cruelty for comedy and thinks tearing people down makes him big. She slung her purse over her shoulder and looked directly into the main camera, speaking to the audience at home. You all deserve better than this. You deserve hosts who lift people up, who celebrate achievements, who understand that true entertainment comes from joy, not meanness. Then she turned back to Jimmy, who was still standing behind his desk, trembling with humiliation and fury. And you, Jimmy, you need to take a long, hard look in the mirror and ask yourself who you really want to be. Because right now, you're just a bully with a microphone, and that's a pretty pathetic legacy. Jimmy finally found his voice, screaming now like a child having a tantrum. You're finished! Do you hear me? I'll make sure you never work in this town again. Cher stopped walking and slowly turned around, one eyebrow raised in amusement. Really, Jimmy? You're going to destroy Cher? The woman who has survived everything this industry could throw at her for 5 decades? The woman who has more money, more influence, and more respect than you'll ever dream of having? She walked back toward his desk, and Jimmy actually took a step backward, as if her very presence was dangerous to him. Let me explain something to you about power, Jimmy. Real power isn't about threatening people or trying to destroy their careers. Real power is having the strength to walk away from people who aren't worth your time. She turned to the audience and bowed gracefully, as if she had just finished a performance. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, giving her a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. People were whistling, cheering, some were even crying. They had just witnessed something extraordinary, something they would talk about for years to come. Jimmy stood there, helpless and humiliated, as his own audience cheered for the woman who had just destroyed him on his own show. His producers were frantically gesturing from the wings, desperate to cut to commercial, but the moment was too powerful to interrupt. Cher blew kisses to the crowd, waved like the queen she had always been, and walked toward the exit. As she reached the edge of the stage, she turned back one final time and looked at Jimmy with something that might have been pity. "Good luck, Jimmy," she said, her voice now gentle, almost sad. "I genuinely hope you figure out how to be better than this, because you can be if you want to." And with that, she was gone, leaving Jimmy Kimmel standing alone at his desk, his show in ruins, his reputation in tatters, and an audience that would never look at him the same way again. The cameras finally cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. In just 20 minutes, Cher had shown the world exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness, when you confuse a guest's grace with vulnerability, and when you forget that some people have earned their legendary status through sheer force of talent and will. Jimmy Kimmel had learned the hard way that some fights you just cannot win, especially when you're picking on someone who has been fighting battles since before you were born. Cher had walked onto that stage as a gracious guest and left as a conquering hero, proving once and for all why she remains, and will always remain, an icon. The lesson was clear. Respect costs nothing, but disrespect can cost you everything. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person you're trying to tear down will turn out to be stronger, smarter, and far more powerful than you ever imagined.